Hello everyone, my name is Karina. I go by Carsey on social media, and in today's video I'm going to take you through the journey of replicating Hermione Granger's gown that she wears in the 2005 film Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. We'll first explore the gown's design translation from book to screen and break down the build process, analyzing the pattern shapes on a half-scale form, and then experiment with fabrics and dye. All this with the aim of wearing the dress for my 2024 graduation. So without further ado, let's hit the books and figure out the wizardry behind Hermione Granger's dress robes. As many know, the Harry Potter films are adapted from the book series of the same name by J.K. Rowling, which was first published in 1997. So many of the clothes shown in the film stem from inspiration from the original text. This is part of what makes the wizarding world so unique in appearance, the fact that characters are described so distinctly and otherworldly compared to our Muggle societies. Hermione's ball gown is one of these garments that has a brief description in the text, and this comes from the fourth book in the Harry Potter series, which was published in the year 2000. In chapter 23, it states, "She was wearing robes made of a floaty periwinkle blue material." The book then goes on to describe how she made everyone speechless in the room with her transformation as a character. 5 years later, the moment was created on the big screen with a young 15-year-old Emma Watson as Hermione Granger in the dress. It was designed by Jenny Tamine, who, much to part of the fandom's distress, did not design the dress to be periwinkle blue. But that doesn't mean she completely strayed away from the description of the dress just because she didn't make it blue. The dress has 3 descriptions: floaty, periwinkle, and blue, of which periwinkle happens to be a type of flower. So in my opinion, she did accomplish part of the book's description. In a 2021 article with Tatler, she explains her thought process. "I wanted to keep the personality of each character, and the most difficult was Hermione, because it had to be a big contrast between the old her and the new her. The reaction to her changed appearance had to be wow. I know that in the book it's supposed to be blue, but I thought that the dress should be pink. Blue is so cold and Hermione should be warm. The dress had to move and be revealing without being too much. I also wanted to have a magical sort of fabric that went from light to dark. I added the frills on the shoulder because it would move when she was dancing. It softened the edges of the dress, and she looked like a blooming flower." Fleur Delacour, played by Clemence Posey, and the Beauxbaton Academy girls were all in blue, so Hermione couldn't have worn blue anyway. Not to mention that the Winter Yule Ball itself was ice-themed, so a blue dress would have Hermione blended into the scenery instead of emphasizing her change in the visual storytelling. The dress was very successful at being flower-like and floaty. It has this wonderful blooming feeling, and this was accomplished, at least in the patterning process, by some unnamed craftspeople, because we really don't have any of the names of these people who worked on these dresses from the films. The base of the dress is made up of what appears to be a satin fabric. There are many pieces, even into the skirt, giving a sharpness and column-like structure to the otherwise soft design. The skirt collapses in on itself in the front, alluding to the fact that there is no support structure underneath. Each line of panels that meet up in the front of the skirt strategically give a seam sandwiching spot for each tier of chiffon to be sewn into. The dress has 8 tiers, not including the details on the shoulders that also drape down. These layers in the back have a pointed design going downward like petals falling, mirroring the front of the dress where we have these pointed shapes in the piecework. The back of the bodice also has this angular design, pointing upward, and her zipper in the original appears to stop at the first tier. To accomplish this tiered effect, I decided that my best option was to work in half scale. I had a half scale in school that I had padded to my measurements for class, and began to tape out the lines of the bodice on the form with black twill tape folded in half, so as to keep the lines as thin as possible for when I began draping. Once that was accomplished, I then draped muslin on the form, making sure to mark with pencil registration marks, and made a basic skirt pattern. I had to use books to hold up the dress form to achieve my full height, as the dress form I am using is myself divided by 2. With the pieces done, I transferred them to paper, trued them up, and then drew evenly the different sections of the skirt. This was all taken to the scanner, and then blown up to 200% in the computer. And I had my physical pattern to form a mock-up. The base of Hermione's gown is this dark pink satin weave fabric. Due to budget constraints, I went with a high quality polyester satin and decided to dye my base dress because I couldn't find a color I liked, or that was close enough to the original gown at the store. The original gown most likely is made from a silk satin or a similar material with a natural fiber content, so that it could be dyed exactly to the rendering. The polyester satin I chose didn't come out of the pot anywhere close to the original due to its synthetic fiber content, so this was the closest I got my dress to go, resulting in a lighter look than the original. Now I had a similar but worse problem with the polyester chiffon tiers. The satin base fabric took the dye well enough to the point where I was actually pretty happy with it. But with the polyester chiffon, it just was not dyeing properly. In fact, no matter how much I dyed the polyester, I could never get it dark enough for the bottom tier, resulting in a pretty poorly done ombre, with the bottom tier having to be store-bought. So confession time. The dress took an unusual amount of time for me to make a project because I had to pretty much put it on the back burner because I just messed up. Now, part of what it was is that I was using polyester chiffon, which ended up with an awful dye job because I, at the time, was not willing to put in the money to buy the more expensive fabric, which would have been silk. And then on top of that, I made the dress originally for my 20th birthday in January 2022. Now, this resulted in that I spent way too much time working on the base of the dress, doing the patterning and the scanning and all of the fundamental structure, to the point where when I got down to doing the chiffon layers, I really only had like a day left to do them for the party. And it's not some of my proudest sewing, I will say, to the point where I was so upset with the dress that I put it away in my in like the rack in the sewing room, and I just did not want to look at it. So it pretty much sat there for a year and a half to about 2 years before I decided to pick it up again. To make matters worse, the invisible zipper broke the day of the party, so my dad had to sew me into the dress. I now hate invisible zippers because of that exact experience. I'm just gonna have to remind myself going forward never to use them again. So fast forward 2 years in the future. So I finally decided to pull the dress out because of my graduation. And I knew I needed a project that would not be an entirely new dress, nothing entirely from scratch, because I didn't have the time for that, nor the energy, as I had just wrapped up designing my first show ever. So what I really needed was something a little bit more simple, at least simple in my world, my brain simple. So I decided that the dress was the best thing to pick up again, since it was almost done and it just needed all of that chiffon chopped off and replaced. I had gone back and forth over how to exactly pattern and cut the chiffon tiers. I knew that silk chiffon was my solution for the dye problem, but the pattern for the tiers was a completely different issue to solve. My first unsuccessful draft for the chiffon tiers had a pattern for each tier, with the idea that if I just made the circumference of the inside of the circle the length the tier needed, it would result in a flounce that would fit the tier perfectly. Now, this method was unsuccessful and quite frankly wasted a lot of polyester chiffon. Too many of the patterns for the tiers exceeded the width of the material, and they increasingly lost kick as the circumference grew bigger. This resulted in the bottom tiers having a flat appearance, as if they had been cut on straight. This issue I had stumbled upon was consequence of me 2 years ago not understanding the fundamental principles of circle patterns. For whatever reason, the smaller your circumference on the inside of the circle, the more kick and visual fall the skirt will have. Through my re-education process on circles, I discovered 2 possible patterns that I could use for the skirt: a normal circle pattern or a spiral pattern. I ended up going with the normal circle pattern because a spiral has a similar issue to just making the circumference bigger. The spiral pattern has more kick towards the center, where everything's more coiled up like with less length, so it has more kick. But the farther down you go in the spiral results in less kick in general, when I needed to be able to consistently control the amount of volume all around the dress. So to solve my issue, I would need to create multiple circles of the same controlled size and then piece them together in varying amounts for each tier to keep the volume and floatiness of the original dress. Keeping in mind that the center back pieces would need to be in the shape of a cascade to allow for a pointed petal fall in the back. Instead of wasting my time trying to perfectly calculate how much of each circle I needed for each tier, I decided to go with a quicker method. I simply started with a base pattern that had enough length and then chose to cut and temporarily place the circles on the skirt with pins and to progressively watch the progression of the skirt, leaving extra length in the tiers with the idea of easing the tiers into place with gathering threads, giving me wiggle room to be less precise. This decision made the cutting and placement of the circles I later called flounces faster. It also helped me realize sooner that the 6 yards of silk chiffon I had ordered for this project and cut up wasn't enough actually to finish a skirt, so I ended up buying 2 more, resulting in a total of 8 yards of silk chiffon for the entire dress. But now it was finally time to do justice to the dress and give it a proper dye job. Now, I am not an expert at dye work. It is an area I am progressively growing in, so my methods, although written down, are partially done by eye and feeling with the help of the Rit Dye Formula website. Now, I knew that the color I was going to use was fuchsia Rit dye, but I needed to figure out how to get the color darker for the bottom layers. At first, I experimented with adding a little red, but that resulted in a color too warm compared to the original, which had a winey look. After some digging, I tried adding purple to fuchsia, and bingo, I had my color. Purple really does solve everything. The process of dyeing the silk chiffon layers is as follows. First, I kept consistent high boiling heat in my designated dye pot of water, pouring in my mixture of 2 caps of fuchsia and a little more than half a cap of purple. I then went to work dropping in each of my mid-tier layers for 15 seconds into the pot. They were then pulled out, rinsed in cold water, patted flat on a towel, and hung to dry outside. For the bottom layers, I left it in for 30 seconds each. Now on my samples, this had resulted in a very clear distinction between the 15 and the 30 seconds, but for whatever reason, when I was working in the big old dye pot, it just resulted in all of the tiers having the same color. So I decided to go back and re-dye the bottom tiers again, adding this time an additional 2 caps of fuchsia and 1 cap of purple into the pot. And in the end, it resulted in this beautiful ombre, which was going to make the petal-like design of this skirt just look so pretty. I sewed each tier's multiple sections together using French seams to protect the raw edge, and I prepped the top with a long gathering stitch for later installation before hemming. Now the decision I made on the hem took a while for me to formulate, as I am unfamiliar with hemming, such a lightweight material with extreme curves and mass quantities, because there's more room for error. At first, I thought a rolled hem on a serger might work, but after a few samples, I realized that the serge method would be difficult to maintain without running off the edge and give the tiers too heavy of an appearance. It was when I visited a traveling museum exhibit in Jacksonville that I finally found my answer. And not for a little side note, I had been looking for this exhibit forever, and a classmate of mine sent me where it was, and I was so happy it came to Florida. In the exhibit named Sporting Fashion, the History of Women's Sportswear, I spent hours analyzing all the beautiful extant garments. The garment that caught my eye for this solution was a beautiful 1930s dress posed with a dog. This floral print dress had sleeves with fluttery edges made up of dozens of cutouts of the flowers. When I looked closer at the edges, I discovered that the hem method was a fold and zig at the machine. Taking this knowledge back with me, I went ahead and made some samples using the fold and zig method. And behold, the result was this beautiful and delicate looking hem. So installing all the tiers resulted in about a process that was 1 hour for each tier, as I had to seam rip the area, remove the sliver of remaining poly chiffon, and then serge the interior to prevent it from fraying. Once this prep work was done, I then gathered down the tier, pinning it in place, basting it down at the machine with a 4-stitch length, before sewing it in permanently with a 3, sandwiching the seam. I started from the bottom, working up, so that no tier above would get in the way of the sewing process. Watching the gown evolve was so satisfying. It just kept getting floofier and floofier and floofier, to the point where sometimes I would just twist the mannequin to see it flow. So once all the chiffon layers were on, all that was left was to install the zipper and fix minor areas around the hem. So 2 things to note before we get into the reveal of what exactly I changed in the design of the original gown to my version of the gown. The first change was that the zipper on my body needed to be longer to allow me to get into the dress. So I designed the top tier to be 2 separate pieces that were then sewn together up to where the zipper started. The second is I made a decision to eliminate the waist tie, as I prefer the dress without it. And I know you're all curious, so here are the final numbers. The base of the dress is 64 pieces, and the chiffon tiers is 21 pieces, making a total of 85 pieces on the dress. So without further ado, here is my finished Hermione Granger gown.
Rodriguez Toledo.
It's very fitting that the Hermione ball gown is my grad dress from university. It is, in a sense, my graduation gown from Hogwarts. A goodbye to my formal education years that shows off some of the skills I learned along the way. A dress that shows I have bloomed for my studies and am ready to continue my career as a professional. But much like Granger, I am never truly done studying. So going forward with my mission to grow into the best possible craftsperson I can be, I'm continuing my education on my own in this new chapter of my life. So 2 years for finally finishing school and finishing this dress and just having all the time now to do all the things I've been wanting to do, including finishing the Scooby-Doo series, because that has been going on for way too long. I'll see you guys next time.